Alright, what's going on everybody? So every year there's a plethora of fantasy anime released, many of which are from the isekai genre. 2022 has just started and there are already several series from that genre premiering this season. One upcoming series that I've been curious about since its announcement is The Executioner and Her Way of Life. Also known as Virgin Road, this fantasy series is based off of a light novel written by Mato Sato. In anticipation for the show's release this spring, I decided to check out the first volume of the manga. Unfortunately, only the light novel has been released in English, so I had to read scanned translations. This series has a very unique premise involving the isekai concept. The manga is centered on a priestess and executioner for the church named Minnow. As an executioner, her job is to secretly kill strays or lost ones, people who have been summoned from another world. Strays possess an immense amount of guiding power and energy that exists naturally in the world. They also possess a special ability referred to as a schema. Some strays have a schema that are powerful enough to destroy the world if they lose control, and are therefore considered a major threat by the church. The story kicks off with a boy being summoned to the world by the king and a witch. After being kicked out of the palace, he meets Minnow, and after some talking, she learns that another person was summoned by the king. After that, some stuff happens which I won't spoil, and then Minnow sets her sights on the other stray that was summoned by the king, named Akari Tokito. Upon killing Akari, her schema activates, bringing her back to life. Since she is unable to kill Akari herself, Minnow is ordered to bring her to the ancient city of Garum, where she can be killed at the ritual site. The major conflict in Volume 1 occurs once they board the train headed toward Garum, in which Minnow struggles to not only protect Akari, but also the passengers on board. Volume 1 starts out a little slow, with Akari not being introduced until Chapter 3. The story starts to pick up around chapters 5 and 6 once they board the train. To be clear, I'm not saying that the beginning was boring. I was never bored while reading this, but in terms of its pacing, it's a lot slower than what I expected. The first volume consists of 9 chapters, which are actually quite short, with the longest being around 35 pages. The first chapter establishes the world and the main character, and then the next chapter is more action-filled, with the introduction of Minnow's assistant Momo in the latter half. Aside from the first couple of chapters, there really isn't a lot of exposition, and the little that there is, I thought was handled well. For example, Minnow's explanation of the world in chapter 1 occurs naturally since the boy becomes curious about this strange place he's found himself in. Unfortunately, there isn't a lot of world building, and the manga doesn't bother to explain aspects of its lore like the sigils, the scriptures, or its social class system referred to as the 3 estates. While you won't be lost by not knowing more about these things, there is a lack of detail here. I haven't read the light novel, but I imagine that it goes into much more detail on these things. Also, in regards to the main conflict on the train, it's never elaborated on what the villain's main goal was, aside from what one character tells Momo. The author states what they were after, but not why. This could be something that is addressed either in the next volume or perhaps the light novel. Before I talk about the characters, I need to touch on the translation and the artwork. Since I'm going off of a fan translation, it's hard to definitively judge the writing, especially when there could be an official release that changes certain terminology and makes things much more clear. After my last manga reviews, that is a fact that I'm trying to keep in mind when evaluating the writing as a whole. The translation was mostly good aside from a few small grammatical mistakes. The second chapter was probably the worst, containing the most errors and some unusual phrasing. Some of Momo's dialogue was worded to where she refers to herself in the third person, which could be a mistake, but even so, I think that works for that particular character. In terms of the artwork, I really love some of the character designs and the illustrations done by Ryo Mitsuya. I absolutely adore Minnow's character design. When I initially saw some of the light novel covers, I wasn't a fan of the black bow in her hair that sticks up and kind of looks like cat ears sometimes. However, I started to appreciate it the more I read the manga. There were times where I would just spend several minutes studying a panel with this character in it because her design is so cool. I like the designs for the other characters like Momo and Akari too, but my second favorite is the Night Princess, Ashana Grisarika. Her minimalist clothing is unconventional for someone who likes to fight a lot, but it looks good and I like the whole diamond motif. Aside from the character designs, Mitsuya's art is fairly detailed, and there was only one instance where I thought a character was drawn a bit awkwardly. Other than a few chapters, there's a lot of action which the majority of the time was easy to follow. There might be a couple of panels where you might wonder what the heck is going on. There was this one particular panel in chapter 6 that caught me off guard. In general, the panel organization was excellent, and I think Mitsuya makes good use of the space on the page. It was very easy to go from one panel to the other. I usually don't talk about the characters last, but today I'm making an exception. So far, I'm liking the characters introduced, although I might start hating Akari if she is a nuisance throughout the series, like she is in this volume. Assuming that the dynamic between her and Minnow doesn't change throughout the story, she will likely make things more difficult for her and will always have to be protected. Akari completely trusts Minnow, which is convenient for an executioner like Minnow, whose job requires her to deceive and get close to her targets. She has to put on this kind and friendly facade and then stow away her emotions, become cold and serious when it's time to kill someone. And she can do this at the drop of a dime. She's a very efficient killer. I like that Sato wrote the character in a way where her true self comes out sometimes. Minnow doesn't relish in the killing of Scrays, and this is made clear early on in the story. She kills only because it's her duty, but it's apparent that all the killing she's done does weigh on her. Despite what she has to do, she isn't completely cold-hearted or without compassion. Another thing that I liked about the character is her more upbeat interactions with Momo and Akari. Momo is a character that I think I'm really gonna love when the anime airs. She's cheerful, energetic, and full of enthusiasm. She's also a little sneaky. This character reminds me of a certain teleporting lesbian from a certain scientific railgun. If you're a fan of Kuroko Shirai, you might like this character. Just like how Kuroko is crazy about Mizuka in that show, Momo is crazy about Mino. Another thing that both of these characters seem to have in common is that they can handle themselves in a fight. I like the weapon that Momo uses, which the translation refers to as a jigsaw. It's a thread with what looks to be sharp edges or blades on it. The author uses this character to inject some comedy relief where necessary, and her interactions with Minu made me chuckle. I also love her attitude toward Ashana. Ashana is another character I think I'm going to really enjoy when the anime airs. If you like female characters that are strong and all about fighting, then you might like her. Ashana is all about beauty and strength. In almost every panel, she's always smiling and having a good freaking time. One thing I totally neglected to mention up until this point is the fact that this manga is also a Yuri series, so expect to see women blushing over each other a lot. Overall, the first volume of The Executioner and Her Way of Life is a decent start to what looks to be an interesting fantasy series. I would probably recommend checking out the light novel over this if you want a richer depiction of the world and more context. Regardless of which you choose to read, if you're a fan of fantasy, isekai, or Yuri stories, then you might want to check this out. If you read the manga or the light novel, let me know what you guys thought about it in the comment section below. Thank you guys for watching as always. I'm out of here. Peace.